Ever wondered if your dating life could get any worse? What if a single misstep on a date could shatter your entire future, not just your weekend plans? What if gossip wasn't just online, but a literal death sentence for your social standing? Welcome to medieval high society, where one wrong move could send you plummeting down the social ladder, especially when it came to a simple date. Number 10. Inappropriate public display of affection or flirtation. Stepping into the grand hall of a medieval castle for an evening's entertainment felt like entering a carefully choreographed ballet. Every movement, every glance, every word held a hidden meaning, especially when you were there to make an impression, or perhaps to secure a future alliance through a well-chosen date. Your family's name, their wealth, their standing in the court, it all rested on your shoulders, particularly on how you conducted yourself in front of potential suitors or their watchful kin. The evening might begin with the murmur of voices and the soft strumming of a lute, a gentle melody played by a minstrel positioned in a corner. The hall itself would be a tapestry of rich colors. Banners bearing family crests hung from the high ceilings, roaring fires in enormous stone hearths casting flickering shadows, and the gleam of polished armor from the guards standing silently by the doors. Ladies wore gowns of brocade and velvet, often adorned with pearls and precious stones, their hair carefully braided and netted. Gentlemen wore doublets and hose, their tunics embroidered with intricate patterns, sometimes with fur lining that showed their status. The air itself, though not thick, carried the scent of wood smoke, roasted meats, and expensive perfumes. Now picture this. You are introduced to a promising young nobleman, perhaps the eldest son of a duke, someone whose family holds vast lands and considerable influence. His gaze is polite, his bow respectful. You return a curtsy, ensuring your eyes meet his for just the right amount of time. Not too long, not too short. Conversation begins, perhaps about the latest hunt, or a recent tournament, or even the weather. It is all very formal, very proper. You are aware of the dozens of eyes upon you, not just from the nobleman's family, but from every other person in the hall. Society in the medieval era was a constant performance, and every audience member was a critic. A casual touch in modern terms might seem innocent. A hand placed lightly on an arm during a shared laugh, a gentle brush of fingers as you pass a goblet of wine. But in medieval high society, especially during a date or a courtship, such gestures were loaded with meaning. A lady's honor was her most prized possession, often seen as her family's honor as well. Any hint of impropriety, even if accidental, could tarnish it irrevocably. Consider the banquet setting. You are seated at a long table, perhaps on a bench beside your potential suitor. The meal is served in courses, each dish brought in by servants. There might be roasted swan, venison pie, spiced wine, and elaborate pastries. Conversation continues, interspersed with entertainment, acrobats, jesters, perhaps even a short play. During this time, you might find yourself leaning in slightly to hear a witty remark over the din of the hall. A simple, almost imperceptible lean. But if your shoulder so much as brushed against his even for a moment, the watchful eyes of the Dowager Duchess at the next table would note it. Her lips, though not moving, would purse ever so slightly, or take the instance of a shared glance. In the age of courtly love, admiration was expressed through poetry and gesture, but rarely through physical contact. A prolonged gaze, one that lingered a second too long, could be interpreted as brazenness. If you met the eyes of your suitor across the hall, perhaps during a moment when a minstrel played a particularly poignant tune, and you held that gaze, allowing a slight smile to play on your lips, it might seem romantic to you. To the stern baroness, observing from the gallery above, it would look like an open invitation, an unseemly forwardness. She would recall how her own daughter, properly demure, always kept her eyes cast down, only meeting a suitor's gaze when directly addressed. Whispering was another dangerous territory. If you were engaged in conversation with the young nobleman and you both shared a private joke, so amusing that you lowered your voice to murmur the punchline, a brief, intimate moment created. This act, while seeming harmless, implied a level of familiarity that was not yet earned, certainly not in public. It suggested a secret world between the two of you, an exclusion of everyone else. To the other noblemen and ladies, who were constantly assessing alliances and potential marriages, such whispering meant you were bypassing the proper channels of courtship. It bypassed the chaperones, the watchful parents, the official negotiations. It suggested an independence, a lack of restraint that was utterly unacceptable for a young woman of standing. Dancing, if it happened, was also fraught with peril. Medieval dances were often formal, processional, or circle dances with little physical contact beyond holding hands briefly for a designated movement. A lady might be offered a hand to lead her into the dance or to turn. But to allow a hand to linger, to press slightly, to hold on for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary, was to cross an invisible line. It was not the vigorous, expressive dancing of later centuries. It was a stately affair, a public display of decorum. If your hand remained in his for an extra beat, even when the dance step demanded release, it would be seen. Countess, who had been negotiating your potential marriage to her own son just last week, would notice. Her opinion of you, and by extension your family, would diminish immediately. She would see you as someone who lacked proper training in social graces, someone too eager, too familiar. Even something as simple as laughter could be misinterpreted. A lady of high birth was expected to be graceful, reserved, and modest. A gentle smile, perhaps a soft giggle, was appropriate, but a hearty, unrestrained peal of laughter, especially if shared intimately with a suitor, would be seen as boisterous, unladylike, and lacking in self-control. If your laughter echoed a little too loudly across the hall, drawing the eyes of other guests, it was a social blunder. It announced to everyone that you were not upholding the strict standards of female modesty. The matrons of the court, the arbiters of social rules, would exchange knowing glances. They would see you as someone who had not learned the proper way to conduct herself, someone who would bring disrepute rather than honor to a noble house. Consequences for these seemingly minor transgressions were not immediate public shaming, not a dramatic scene. Instead, it was a slow, chilling withdrawal of social favor. The young nobleman's mother, who had seemed so welcoming, would suddenly become distant. Invitations to further gatherings at their estate might mysteriously cease. Other mothers, who had daughters to marry off, would subtly shift their seating at banquets to put more distance between you and their sons. Whispers, light as a feather but sharp as a blade, would begin to circulate. Did you see how she behaved with Lord Alaric so forward? Her mother must not have taught her any manners. What kind of bride would she make so unrestrained? These whispers were the true weapons of medieval society. Once a reputation for being too familiar or brazen was established, it was incredibly difficult to shake. Your pool of eligible suitors would shrink dramatically. The best families, those most concerned with their lineage and honor, would steer clear. You might find yourself left with options that were less desirable. Men whose families were less prestigious, or who overlooked such perceived flaws because they had fewer choices themselves. Your family, who had invested so much in your upbringing and in securing your future, would bear the brunt of this social damage. Their efforts to forge alliances, to increase their standing, would be undermined by your perceived impropriety on a date. In medieval high society, a public display of affection, no matter how subtle, was a reckless gamble with your entire future. Number 9. Choosing an unsuitable partner or family for a date. Medieval society was a carefully constructed pyramid, and everyone knew their place within it. Marriage, and by extension dating and courtship, was almost never about personal preference. It was a strategic alliance, a merger of families, a way to consolidate power, expand lands, or secure military support. To choose an unsuitable partner for a date, even just for a public appearance, was not merely a social faux pas. It was a declaration that you did not understand the very foundations of your world. Let's say you are a noble lady, the daughter of a powerful earl. Your family's lineage stretches back centuries, intertwined with royalty. Your ancestral lands are vast and fertile. Your father commands a substantial army. Your mother, a woman of impeccable breeding, expects you to marry a man who will elevate your family's status, or at the very least, maintain it. She has spent years cultivating relationships with other powerful families, exchanging letters, arranging visits, all with the goal of securing the perfect match for you. Now imagine you attend a grand feast hosted by the king himself, a vital social event where potential matches are paraded. You are expected to converse with sons of other dukes, marquesses, or, at the very least, prominent barons. Instead, you find yourself drawn to a man who, while perhaps charming and handsome, hails from a family of relatively minor gentry, perhaps even a wealthy merchant's son who has recently purchased a title but has no ancient lineage. Or worse, a knight whose only claim to fame is his prowess in battle, with no lands of his own, merely serving a greater lord. Your conversation flows easily with this unsuitable man. He tells amusing anecdotes. Perhaps he has a quick wit, or he listens to your thoughts with genuine interest. Unlike some of the more aloof noblemen you are usually presented with, you laugh genuinely at his jokes. Your eyes sparkle. You find yourself spending an unusual amount of time in his company, perhaps even accepting his arm for a stroll through the castle gardens before the evening concludes. This might feel like a breath of fresh air for you, a rebellion against the rigid expectations. But to everyone else, especially your parents and the other powerful families present, it was a glaring red flag. First, there's the issue of lineage. Medieval society placed enormous importance on bloodlines. A family's history, their connection to ancient noble houses, their proven loyalty to the crown, these were paramount. To associate closely, even for a short time on a date, with someone whose family tree was less impressive or worse, whose ancestors were known to be commoners or rebellious, was a direct insult to your own family's long-standing heritage. The gossips would begin to whisper, "The earl's daughter is seen spending time with a mere knight. Has she lost her mind? Does she not value her noble blood?" Then there's wealth and land. While a merchant might be rich, his wealth was seen as new money and lacked the prestige of inherited land. Land was power, security, and a symbol of ancient authority. A landless knight, no matter how brave, was simply not a suitable partner for a noble lady whose dowry would likely include vast estates. To be seen dating such a man implied that you were either naive, foolish, or actively devaluing your own assets and your family's future. The other noblemen would shake their heads. "What a pity," they might murmur. "Such a good family, and the daughter shows such poor judgment in her companions." There was also the question of political alliances. Every marriage was a strategic move linking one powerful house to another, solidifying allegiances against rivals or creating a bulwark against external threats. By showing preference for someone outside the acceptable circles, you were essentially undermining your family's carefully laid plans. Your father might have been in delicate negotiations with the Duke of Normandy for your hand in marriage to his son, an alliance that could bring peace to a disputed border region. Your public display of interest in a low-ranking knight could instantly derail those plans, making the Duke question your family's seriousness and suitability. He might conclude that your family lacked control over its own members, or worse, that you were not worthy of his son's hand. Consider the social consequences. Other families, especially those with eligible sons, would take note of your choice. If you were seen to prefer a less suitable match, it would signal to them that you were either unmarriageable by their standards or simply not worth the effort of pursuing. Why would a respectable lord present his son to a lady who showed such poor discernment? You would find fewer invitations arriving for dances, for hunting parties, for private audiences. When you did attend public gatherings, you might find yourself subtly ostracized, politely ignored by those whose favor you most needed to secure a powerful marriage. The impact on your own family would be profound. Your father, who had tirelessly worked to establish your family's reputation, would face humiliation. His political rivals would seize upon your actions, using it as proof that his house was in decline, that he could not even control his own daughter. Your mother, whose greatest ambition was to see you married well, would be devastated. She would feel that her efforts to raise you properly, to instill in you the necessary understanding of social hierarchy, had failed. They would have to work twice as hard to salvage your reputation, possibly by forcing a swift, less advantageous marriage upon you to quell the gossip. The whispers would not merely question your judgment, they would question your family's standing. If the Earl's daughter acts like that, what does it say about the Earl himself? They would ask. Perhaps their family is not as stable as we thought. A seemingly innocent preference for a charming but unsuitable man on a date could therefore send shockwaves through the delicate power balance of medieval high society, threatening your family's alliances, its prestige, and ultimately its very survival. Your choice of a date was never just about you. It was always about your entire lineage. Number 8. Breaking an engagement or betrothal without good cause. In medieval high society, a betrothal was almost as binding as marriage itself. It was not a casual promise made on a whim. It was a formal agreement, often negotiated over months or even years, involving intricate contracts, legal documents, and sworn oaths between powerful families. It involved the exchange of promises, sometimes even parts of dowries or gifts, long before the actual wedding ceremony. To break such an agreement, especially without a gravely serious recognized cause, was to rip apart the very fabric of social trust and order. Imagine you are a young lord, perhaps the heir to a considerable barony in the south. Your parents, ever ambitious, have arranged your betrothal to the daughter of a powerful duke whose lands border yours, an alliance that promises to secure both your territories from encroachment and solidify your military strength. It was a public event witnessed by priests, legal scribes, and representatives from both families. Oaths were sworn, hands were clasped, and a betrothal ring was presented. The date for the marriage has been set perhaps a year or two in the future, allowing time for more arrangements and for both of you to come of age. Now, suppose you meet another young woman, perhaps the daughter of a visiting foreign prince, at a royal court. She is dazzling, more beautiful than your betrothed, perhaps more witty, or perhaps she simply captures your heart in a way your intended never did. You spend a few days in her company, perhaps engaging in what you perceive as innocent flirtation or a delightful date. You find yourself utterly smitten. In a moment of youthful impulsiveness or perhaps genuine misguided conviction, you decide you cannot go through with the arranged marriage. You approach your parents and declare your intention to break off the betrothal. The reaction from your parents would be one of profound shock and outrage. They would not see it as a matter of personal preference, but as a catastrophic political and social blunder. First, there is the legal aspect. A betrothal was a legally binding contract, often more so than modern engagement rings. Breaking it without cause could lead to severe financial penalties. Your family might be forced to return any dowry already received, pay substantial compensation for breach of contract, or even lose portions of their own lands as reparations. The Duke, whose daughter you have jilted, would not merely be offended, he would be legally wronged. He would demand recompense, and the king's courts would likely side with him, as upholding such agreements was vital for maintaining social stability. Second, there is the issue of honor. Your personal honor, and by extension your family's honor, would be utterly ruined. To break an oath, especially one sworn before God and witnesses, was considered a grave sin and a sign of profound untrustworthiness. The Duke and his family would be publicly shamed, their daughter humiliated. They would have every right to seek retribution, not just through legal channels, but through social and even military means. An insulted duke might withdraw his support, refuse passage through his lands, or even incite skirmishes along your shared border. Your family would be seen as unreliable, treacherous, and unworthy of trust. Other families would become wary of making alliances with you, fearing that you would similarly abandon your commitments. Consider the daughter you jilted. Her reputation would be severely damaged. Being rejected after a formal betrothal would cast a shadow over her future prospects. Other suitors might be hesitant to pursue her, wondering if there was some hidden flaw in her character or person that led to the breakup. Her family would have to work tirelessly to restore her standing, perhaps by arranging a less advantageous marriage quickly to show she was still desirable, or by aggressively pursuing the legal case against your family to prove your fault. The consequences for you, the individual, would be dire. You would be branded as capricious, unreliable, and dishonorable. Other lords would avoid inviting you to their courts, fearing you would cause trouble or insult their own kin. Ladies of suitable standing would be forbidden by their parents from even speaking with you, let alone considering you for a date. You might find yourself socially isolated, your name whispered with disdain whenever you entered a hall. Your parents might even disinherit you, passing the title and lands to a younger, more reliable sibling to salvage the family's reputation and secure its future. Your rash decision would have put their entire legacy at risk. Even if you managed to secure a marriage with the new love interest, her family might view you with suspicion, knowing your history of breaking promises. And the jilted duke, a powerful figure, would become a lifelong enemy, always seeking opportunities to undermine your family. Medieval chronicles are filled with tales of feuds ignited by broken betrothals, escalating into generations of conflict and bloodshed. To break an engagement without a universally recognized and accepted cause, such as grievous illness or an act of heresy on the part of the betrothed, was to declare war on the established order. It signaled a profound disrespect for contracts, for honor, and for the families involved. It was an act of social suicide, not just for you, but for your entire lineage, casting a long, dark shadow over your family's future, and making any further successful dates or alliances virtually impossible. Number 7. Displaying excessive wealth or stinginess. Navigating the delicate balance of wealth in medieval high society was a constant tightrope walk. You wanted to display enough wealth to affirm your status, to show that your family was prosperous and powerful. But to be excessive in your display, to flaunt riches without taste or proportionality, was considered vulgar and uncouth. And to be stingy, especially when hospitality was paramount, was an unforgivable sin, signaling a fundamental lack of generosity and social understanding. Either extreme could ruin your reputation faster than a knight losing his armor in a joust. Consider a young nobleman attending a grand feast, perhaps a celebration of a royal wedding or a significant victory in battle. He is seeking to make a good impression, to attract a suitable wife from among the daughters of other influential lords. The excessive display of wealth would manifest in several ways. Perhaps he arrives dressed in clothing so outrageously opulent that it borders on ridiculous. His tunic might be embroidered with so much gold thread that it glitters blindingly under the torchlight, his coat trimmed with not just ermine, but layers of the finest and most expensive sable, perhaps imported from the Far East. His jewels might be too numerous, worn on every finger, around his neck, even sewn into his hat. Sumptuary laws, though not always perfectly enforced, often dictated what different classes could wear. To deliberately flout these laws, to dress above one's station, or even excessively, for it was seen as arrogant and lacking in proper humility. The other guests, subtle in their own displays of wealth, would notice his gaudy appearance. They would whisper, not admiringly, but scornfully, "Look at Lord Reginald. Does he think he is the king himself? Such a vulgar display!" They would see him not as rich, but as foolish, someone who lacked taste and understanding of social decorum. Potential father-in-law would instantly question his judgment and his family's values. Does he believe money alone buys respect? He would think. He has no sense of proper bearing. But the display of wealth wasn't just about clothing, it extended to gifts. If he were to present an outrageous gift to his potential date's family, something disproportionate to the stage of courtship, like a pure gold chalice encrusted with enormous gems when a silver goblet would have sufficed for an initial courtesy, it would be seen as an attempt to buy favor. It implied a lack of respect for the organic progression of courtship and alliance building. The recipient family might feel insulted, as if their honor was being cheapened by a blatant show of riches. Now flip the coin to stinginess. In medieval high society, hospitality was a cornerstone of noble life. A lord was expected to be generous, to host lavish feasts, to provide abundant food and drink for his guests, to reward his retainers handsomely, and to offer shelter to travelers. This generosity was a direct reflection of his power and magnanimity. Imagine this same nobleman, instead of being flashy, is notoriously tight-fisted. When invited to a grand feast at another lord's castle, he arrives with only a meager gift, perhaps a small, unadorned brooch for the lady of the house, when other guests are bringing fine silks or hunting falcons. During the feast itself, he might be seen carefully counting coins when a collection is made for a charity, or complaining about the costly travel, or even openly questioning the quality of the wine served, suggesting it is not as fine as he would have hoped. If he hosted a date at his own castle, the meal might be notably less impressive than expected. Perhaps only 2 courses instead of the customary 5, with less exotic meats or a scarcity of spiced delicacies. The wine might be diluted, the bread stale. The consequences of stinginess were far-reaching. Other lords would brand him as lacking in noble spirit, a man who hoarded his wealth rather than using it to support his household, his guests, and his community. His servants and soldiers would grumble, their loyalty wavering. Why serve a lord who refuses to share his bounty? Potential marriage alliances would evaporate. No respectable family would want their daughter to marry into a house where hospitality was poor, where guests were not honored, and where their own daughter might be expected to live a life of scarcity despite their husband's wealth. What sort of life would our daughter have with such a man? A prospective father-in-law would ponder. He cares only for himself, not for his household or his honor. Chroniclers of the time often praised generous lords and condemned the miserly. A lord known for his open-handedness attracted loyal followers and powerful allies. A stingy lord found himself isolated, his castle rarely visited, his influence waning. His name would be associated with grudging hospitality and small-mindedness, not with the grandness and honor expected of a noble house. Whether it was through a tasteless display of too much gold or a refusal to offer proper hospitality, the message was the same. This individual does not understand the fundamental rules of noble society. They do not comprehend that true power is not just about having wealth, but about how you use it for the benefit of your allies, your dependents, and your reputation. A young man or woman displaying either extreme would find their invitations diminishing, their marriage prospects evaporating, and their family name subtly but irrevocably tarnished, all because they failed to understand the delicate art of managing their material possessions. Number 6. speaking ill of others, especially powerful figures. The medieval court was a viper's nest of intrigue, ambition, and shifting loyalties. Words held immense power, capable of elevating a man to power or sending him to the dungeon. To speak ill of others, particularly those in positions of power, the king, powerful dukes, influential churchmen, or even rival noble families, was not merely rude. It was an act of extreme recklessness, a political and social suicide, especially when you are trying to make a good impression on a date. Consider a young lady at a royal tournament, a splendid affair of jousting, archery, and feasting. She is hoping to catch the eye of a suitable suitor, perhaps a brave knight or a rising courtier. She finds herself in conversation with a group of other young noble women discussing the day's events. King himself is present, seated in a grand pavilion, surrounded by his closest advisors and family. Now imagine this young lady, seeking to appear clever or discerning, decides to openly criticize the king. Perhaps she laments the king's recent decree on taxes, suggesting it is unfair, or she questions his judgment in appointing a certain official, or she makes a wry comment about his mistress or his latest hunting mishap. She might even gossip about the queen's new gown, suggesting it is unfashionable, or mock the stutter of a powerful duke's son. She believes her sharp wit and cynical observations make her seem sophisticated. However, the medieval court was filled with informants and whisperers. What you said in private conversation, even during a seemingly innocent date, could easily be carried to the ears of the person you spoke ill of. A lady-in-waiting who happened to be passing by, a seemingly harmless courtier who was secretly loyal to the criticized duke, or even one of the other young noblewomen eager to curry favor, could report your words. Consequences for such verbal indiscretion were swift and severe. First, there's the issue of loyalty and respect. The king's authority was considered divinely ordained. To speak ill of him was not just an insult. It was bordering on treason. Even criticizing a powerful duke or earl was seen as questioning their authority and challenging their standing. Such behavior was not merely impolite, it signaled a lack of respect for the established hierarchy, a dangerous and potentially rebellious spirit. No one in power wanted such a person close to them, certainly not as a potential family member through marriage. If word of your disrespectful comments reached the king, you could find yourself and your family stripped of lands, titles, or privileges. Your father might be summoned to explain your audacity, perhaps even forced to pay a substantial fine or lose favor at court. Your family's carefully built network of alliances could crumble overnight. Second, there's the impact on your marriage prospects. No noble family would want to ally themselves with someone known for loose lips and a disrespectful tongue. Prospective mother-in-law would fear that you would bring scandal and disfavor upon their own house. What sort of daughter-in-law would she make, she would wonder. She would offend every powerful person she meets and drag our family into disrepute. Families sought quiet, obedient, and respectful daughters-in-law, not those who might provoke the wrath of the crown or powerful neighbors. Even if you were speaking ill of a less powerful individual, perhaps a rival noble family, he would still reflect poorly on you. It would show that you were prone to gossip, that you were unkind, and that you lacked the prudence necessary for a lady or lord of high standing. In a society where reputations were everything, being known as a malicious gossiper made you untrustworthy. Who would share secrets with you? Who would trust you with sensitive negotiations? No one would want you as a friend, let alone a spouse. Consider the practical implications during a date. If you are constantly maligning others, your potential suitor would not find you charming or witty. He would find you unpleasant and dangerous. He would realize that if you spoke ill of others in his presence, you would surely speak ill of him and his family behind his back. The subtle snubs would begin. He might find an excuse to end the conversation early. to move away from your group, or to simply avoid you at future gatherings. Other young men, hearing of your reputation, would steer clear. The social climate of the medieval court was one of extreme caution. Plots, betrayals, and political maneuvering were constants. Therefore, those who spoke freely and disrespectfully were seen as security risks, not desirable partners. The old adage, "Loose lips sink ships," applied perfectly to medieval reputations. Your words, if directed critically at powerful figures, could sink not just your own social standing, but potentially your entire family's fortunes. You would be branded a loose cannon, a danger to any who associated with you, making a successful date or alliance an impossible dream. Number 5. Demonstrating a lack of religious piety. In medieval high society, religion was not just a personal belief. It was the bedrock of daily life, law, and social order. Church held immense power, influencing everything from political decisions to the very calendar of the year. To demonstrate a lack of religious piety, especially during a date or courtship, was to challenge the fundamental values of your entire society and to invite severe social condemnation. Picture a young noblewoman, daughter of a powerful earl, attending Sunday Mass in the castle chapel. She is there with her family, and among the congregation are several eligible young noblemen and their watchful parents, all subtly assessing potential matches. The chapel itself is a sacred space, adorned with religious carvings, stained glass depicting saints, and the scent of incense lingering in the air. The priest, robed in his vestments, leads the service with solemnity. Now imagine this young woman's conduct during the service. Instead of kneeling devoutly during prayers, she might remain standing or genuflect carelessly. Instead of listening attentively to the sermon, her eyes might wander perhaps to a handsome suitor across the aisle or to the decorative patterns on the chapel ceiling. She might yawn openly or fidget, or even engage in a hushed conversation with a lady-in-waiting during the most sacred parts of the liturgy. Perhaps she skips Mass entirely, feigning a sudden illness that mysteriously disappears when a more entertaining activity like a hawking party is proposed for the afternoon. These seemingly small actions, though perhaps motivated by boredom or simple inattention, would be observed. The medieval era was one where religious observance was expected, not an optional activity. To fail in this regard was to cast doubt on your moral character, your spiritual soundness, and your suitability as a partner. The ramifications of such a display of impiety were significant. First, there was the issue of moral character. A devout Christian was expected to be virtuous, honest, and disciplined. A lack of piety suggested a lack of these qualities. Potential suitor's family would view such behavior with alarm. Would she be a good mother, raising her children in the faith? Would she be a loyal and obedient wife? Or would her irreverence extend to her marital vows? Her apparent disregard for God's laws would lead them to question her commitment to human laws and social norms. The mother of a prospective groom would whisper, "She shows no reverence for God. What sort of influence would she have on our son or on our future grandchildren?" Second, there was the social and political dimension. The church was intertwined with secular power. Bishops and abbots were powerful figures in their own right, often serving as advisors to kings and nobles. To offend the church, even through perceived disrespect, could invite ecclesiastical censure. While a young lady might not be excommunicated for fidgeting during Mass, the reputation for impiety could lead to less favorable treatment from church officials, fewer blessings, and perhaps even a subtle undermining of her family's standing by influential clergy. No lord wanted a spouse for his child who might draw the ire of the church. Consider how this would impact your interactions on a date. If you were presented to a young nobleman who was known for his piety, perhaps someone who had gone on crusade or was particularly devoted to a saint, your lack of religious fervor would be a glaring incompatibility. he might find your flippancy deeply off-putting. He would see you not as a potential partner to build a life with, but as someone whose values were fundamentally opposed to his own and to the expectations of society. Beyond outright disrespect in church, a lack of piety could also manifest in other ways. Refusing to participate in charitable works, speaking cynically about saints or miracles, or showing undue interest in forbidden texts or practices were all signs of a dangerous lack of faith. Not observing fast days, feasting on meat during Lent when everyone else was eating fish, was another public demonstration of disregard for religious strictures. Such behavior would be interpreted not as modern independence but as arrogance and a dangerous path towards heresy, a crime of the gravest sort. The gossip would spread quickly. "Lady Eleanor shows no devotion," they would say. "She giggled during the sermon. Is she truly a Christian?" These whispers would make her an undesirable match. The most devout and respected families would steer clear, preferring a daughter-in-law who would bring spiritual strength and moral uprightness to their household. She might find herself only considered by less pious families, or those desperate for a match regardless of character. A medieval date was not just a social outing. It was a character assessment. To demonstrate a lack of religious piety was to fail this assessment on a fundamental level. It signaled that you did not value the very foundation of your society, that you were morally suspect, and that you could bring spiritual and social dishonor upon any family that dared to ally with you. Your future, particularly your marriage prospects, would be severely curtailed, leaving you with few desirable options in a world where piety was paramount. Number 4. Poor hygiene or grooming. In the age of grand castles and glittering courts, medieval society often had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of personal presentation. While not matching modern standards, good hygiene and careful grooming were vital signs of status, self-respect, and consideration for others. To neglect these aspects, to present yourself as unclean or unkempt, was a glaring social misstep that would quickly ruin your reputation and make you utterly undesirable for any noble date. Imagine a grand ball being held in the Duke's Hall, a gathering of the region's most prominent families. The scent of roasted meats, beeswax candles, and fresh rushes covering the floor fills the air. Musicians play lively tunes. Everyone is dressed in their finest attire, their clothes fresh and well kept. Now picture a young nobleman seeking to impress a potential suitor, perhaps the daughter of a powerful baron. He might have bathed recently, but perhaps not as thoroughly as expected. His hands, though perhaps recently washed, might still show traces of dirt from the stables or a morning hunt, neglected fingernails betraying his lack of attention. His hair, perhaps long and unbraided, might be tangled and greasy, not combed and scented, as was customary for noblemen. His breath, having just consumed a hearty meal of garlic-laden stew, might carry an unpleasant odor. His clothes, though perhaps made of expensive fabric, might betray signs of wear or neglect. A faint stain from a previous meal, a wrinkle that suggests it has not been properly aired or pressed, a slight musty smell from being stored improperly. Perhaps his shoes, though made of fine leather, are scuffed and muddy from the journey, not polished and clean as expected indoors. Even subtle odors, like the lingering scent of stale sweat from a recent physical exertion, could be highly off-putting in a close social setting. Consequences of such neglect were immediate and palpable. First, there was the sensory impact. People would physically recoil, perhaps subtly turning their heads away or finding excuses to maintain a greater distance. The pleasant conversation would quickly turn awkward. Potential date would find themselves subtly trying to create space, her eyes darting to her chaperones, silently pleading for rescue. The very act of being near someone with poor hygiene could be distressing, making sustained interaction impossible. Second, there was the social implication. Good hygiene and grooming were outward signs of an ordered household, careful upbringing, and a respectful understanding of social expectations. For a noble, it signaled that you had the resources, servants, clean water, clean clothes, and the discipline to maintain yourself to the expected standard. To be unkempt suggested a lack of these things, either a lack of personal care or a household in disarray. Signaled that you did not care enough to present yourself properly for such an important occasion, and by extension did not respect the hosts or the other guests. Consider the chaperones and parents of the young woman you were trying to impress. They would notice everything. A young lady's mother would subtly sniff the air, her eyes keenly observing his fingernails and the state of his hair. She would immediately think, "This man is not fit for my daughter. He does not even care for himself. What kind of home would he provide? What sort of reputation would he bring upon our family?" She would conclude that he was careless, perhaps even slovenly, and lacking in the proper respect for noble appearances. Whispers would follow. "Did you notice Lord Oswald? He looked as though he'd slept in his clothes. His breath was truly offensive. Surely he must have forgotten to wash. How dreadful." These whispers, though quiet, were deadly to a reputation. They would spread among the ladies and gentlemen of the court, marking you as someone to be avoided. No one would want to sit next to you at a feast, or dance with you, or engage in prolonged conversation. Furthermore, a lack of hygiene could even suggest a lack of good health. While medieval people did not fully understand germ theory, they recognized that ill health often came with unpleasant odors or visible skin conditions. To appear unkempt might suggest you were suffering from some illness or had a weak constitution, making you an undesirable match from a purely practical perspective. Families sought healthy, vigorous partners for their children, not someone who might quickly succumb to illness or spread it. A noble was expected to be refined, cultured, and presentable. A date in medieval society was a critical opportunity for inspection and evaluation. To fail in basic hygiene and grooming was to fail this assessment on a very fundamental physical level. It marked you as someone unsuitable for noble company, someone whose carelessness and lack of attention to detail would bring shame rather than honor to any family with whom you sought alliance. Your prospects for a successful marriage would plummet, leaving you socially isolated and effectively unmarriageable by anyone of consequence. Number 3. Publicly shaming a suitor or date. In medieval high society, public humiliation was a weapon of immense power, capable of destroying a person's standing and undermining an entire family's prestige. To deliberately shame a suitor or a date in public was an act of aggressive social warfare, ensuring not only that the shamed party would never associate with you again, but that others would view you as cruel, dangerous, and utterly lacking in grace. This was a move that would boomerang, destroying your own reputation in the process. Picture a scene at a grand courtly gathering, perhaps a royal birthday celebration, where many eligible young men and women are present, seeking alliances. You are a young lady, the daughter of a powerful duke, and you are being courted by a young lord, heir to a neighboring barony. He has been sending you gifts, writing poetry, and dedicating his jousts to your favor. Tonight he approaches you in the crowded hall, perhaps to ask you to dance or to present a small token of affection. Now imagine you have decided you do not like this lord. Perhaps he is too plain, or his wit is dull, or you simply find him tedious. Instead of politely declining his advances or offering a subtle, graceful rejection, you decide to make a spectacle of him. As he approaches, you perhaps with a hopeful smile, you turn your back dramatically, or you laugh loudly with your companions, pointing discreetly at his slightly ill-fitting tunic. As he attempts to speak, you cut him off with a sarcastic remark about his recent poor performance in a hunting party. Or you loudly question his family's recent financial misfortunes. You might even publicly dismiss a gift he offers, holding it up for ridicule before handing it back to him with a sneer. The immediate reaction in the hall would be a sudden hush, followed by a flurry of whispers. All eyes would turn to the shamed lord, then to you. His face would flush crimson, his shoulders would slump, he would be utterly humiliated. Consequences for your actions would be severe and widespread. First, there is the insult to the lord's honor. In medieval society, a man's honor was everything. To be publicly ridiculed, especially by a woman he was courting, was a profound blow. This was not a private disagreement. It was an open declaration of contempt. The lord would not only feel personally wounded, but would also be seen as weak or inadequate by his peers. His family would be deeply offended. They would view your action as a direct attack on their honor and prestige. This could lead to a bitter feud between your families, with long-lasting implications for land alliances and political power. No one would want their son or brother to marry into a family that sanctioned such cruel public behavior. Second, there is the impact on your own reputation. While you might have aimed to appear strong or discerning, you would instead be seen as cruel, arrogant, and ill-mannered. Other potential suitors, witnessing your behavior, would be instantly put off. They would fear similar treatment. If she treats a potential suitor with such disdain, how would she treat her own husband? They would ponder. She is too sharp-tongued, too malicious. Mothers would warn their sons to steer clear of you, instructing them to avoid you at all costs. She would bring nothing but shame and strife to her household. They would advise. The court, which valued discretion and polite maneuvering over open confrontation, would see your actions as a violation of social norms. You would be branded as someone who could not control her temper or her tongue, someone who lacked the grace and decorum expected of a noblewoman. Other ladies would become wary of you, fearing that your cruelty might extend to them. You would find yourself subtly excluded from conversations, rarely invited to intimate gatherings, and generally avoided. Even if you were a very desirable match due to your family's wealth or power, your public shaming of another noble would make you a difficult prospect. Some families might reluctantly consider you for their sons, but only out of extreme necessity, and with many reservations. You would be seen as a troublemaker, someone who lacked the soft skills necessary for harmonious marriage and social relations. Your parents, who had worked tirelessly to secure your status, would be horrified. They would be forced to apologize profusely to the insulted lord's family, perhaps offering concessions or paying reparations, all to try and mend the broken social ties that your actions had severed. The whispers would follow you everywhere. She humiliated Lord Reginald in front of everyone. Such a wicked tongue, that one. Your name would become synonymous with cruelty, not charm. In a society where alliances were built on trust and respect, your public act of shaming would make you untrustworthy and unpalatable, sealing your fate as an undesirable partner for anyone of consequence. You would be left with greatly diminished prospects, facing a future of social isolation and perhaps even a forced marriage to someone far below your station, simply to remove you from the marriage market and quell the lasting scandal. Number 2. Challenging social hierarchy or customs. Medieval high society was rigidly structured, a pyramid with the monarch at its apex, followed by the great magnates, then lesser nobles, and so on. Every individual had a designated place, and their behavior, particularly during important social occasions, like a date, was expected to conform to that status. To openly challenge this hierarchy or established customs was not just a social gaffe. It was a subversive act, an offense against the very order of the world, and it would swiftly ruin your reputation. Consider a young lady, the daughter of a respected but not immensely powerful baron. She is attending a royal court, an opportunity to meet potential suitors from higher ranks. She is seated at a table appropriate to her family's standing, not too close to the royal dais, but not in the shadows either. Now imagine she decides to disregard these unwritten rules. She might, for example, try to sit at the high table with the dukes and earls, pushing past those of higher rank. Or, during a formal procession, she might attempt to walk ahead of a countess who outranks her. She might address a powerful bishop with undue familiarity, using his first name instead of his proper title. Perhaps she scoffs openly at a long-held tradition like the precise etiquette for presenting oneself to the king, or she expresses disdain for the established order of precedence at a feast. She might argue openly with the duke about the proper way to conduct a hunt, or dismiss a centuries-old custom as old-fashioned and pointless. These actions, though seemingly minor, were profound challenges to the medieval way of life. First, there's the issue of respect for authority and order. The social hierarchy was seen as divinely ordained, a reflection of God's order on earth. To challenge it was to challenge God's will, or at least to show a profound lack of respect for the established powers. It implied that you believed yourself to be above the rules, that you did not recognize the authority of those above you, or that you lacked the intelligence to understand the system. The immediate reaction from those around her would be a mixture of shock and outrage. The countess she tried to bypass would give her a frosty glare. The duke she argued with would dismiss her with a curt word, perhaps even turning his back. The courtiers observing this would exchange knowing glances, their expressions full of disdain. They would see her not as courageous or independent, but as ignorant, arrogant, and ill-bred. Second, the challenge to customs signaled a dangerous rebelliousness. Medieval society was built on tradition. Customs, from the way you bowed to the king to the specific dishes served at a feast, were not arbitrary. They were anchors of stability, linking the present to the past and providing a shared understanding of behavior. To reject them meant rejecting the collective wisdom and heritage of society. No one wanted a spouse who would disrupt the ancient rhythms and expectations of their noble house. Consider the impact on your potential suitors. A young nobleman himself, deeply ingrained in the hierarchical system, would be horrified by such behavior. He would see you as someone who would bring chaos and disrespect into his own household. His parents, who had meticulously climbed the social ladder and fiercely protected their own standing, would be appalled. She has no sense of decorum, they would declare. She does not know her place. She would be a disaster for our family, constantly insulting those above her and inciting resentment from those below. Such a person would be seen as an outsider, someone who did not belong even if they were born into nobility. The court would begin to ostracize her. Invitations from higher-ranking families would cease to arrive. Even families of equal or slightly lower standing might avoid her, fearing that her disregard for hierarchy would rub off on their own children, or that she might cause an awkward scene that would reflect poorly on them by association. Her own family would face significant embarrassment and pressure. Her father might be forced to publicly reprimand her, perhaps even sending her away to a convent for a period of re-education, to restore her reputation and signal to the court that his family did not condone her behavior. Her actions would undermine any efforts her family had made to forge alliances or gain favor with more powerful houses. The whispers would be damning. Lady Isabella thinks she is better than everyone. She has no respect for her betters. She is a threat to the established order. These whispers would effectively end her chances for a good marriage. In a society where place and tradition were everything challenging, the hierarchy was an act of self-destruction, ensuring social isolation and a future devoid of desirable marriage prospects. Number 1. Engaging in open immorality or promiscuity. In medieval high society, a woman's chastity was her most valuable asset, directly tied to her honor, her family's honor, and her marriage prospects. For a man, while the standards were somewhat looser, Open promiscuity or immoral behavior was still deeply damaging to his reputation, signaling a lack of self-control, a disregard for social norms, and a potential threat to a prospective wife's lineage. To engage in either, especially during a date or courtship, was to ignite a firestorm of scandal that would utterly ruin your social standing and future. Imagine a young noblewoman, the daughter of a powerful duke, being presented at court. Her future husband is likely already being negotiated, perhaps even decided. Her every move is scrutinized, her virtue presumed and guarded. Now consider what would happen if she were to engage in open immorality or promiscuity. This could take many forms. Perhaps she is discovered in a clandestine meeting with a man not her betrothed, a meeting without chaperones in the secluded part of the castle gardens at night. Or she might be seen to be overly flirtatious with multiple men, not just one, but actively encouraging improper attention from several suitors or even married noblemen, perhaps exchanging suggestive glances, touching them inappropriately. Worse still, she might be discovered to have engaged in physical intimacy outside of marriage, a secret liaison with a knight or a courtier, especially if it leads to pregnancy. The consequences for such actions would be catastrophic and immediate. First, and most critically, her chastity would be irrevocably compromised. For a noblewoman, virginity before marriage was paramount. It ensured the legitimacy of heirs, which was vital for the continuation of lineage, the inheritance of lands, and the stability of noble houses. If her chastity was doubted, or worse proven to be lost, her value as a bride plummeted to zero for any respectable family. No lord would risk marrying his son to a woman whose children might not be his, or whose scandalous past would bring perpetual shame to his family. Second, her family's honor would be utterly destroyed. Her actions would not be seen as personal failings, but as a direct reflection on her parents, her siblings, and her entire lineage. Her father would be shamed, his authority questioned, his family's name disgraced. Her mother would be seen as having failed utterly in her duty to raise a virtuous daughter. This would severely damage their political standing, their alliances, and their ability to secure favorable marriages for other children. Other families would actively distance themselves from such a tainted house, fearing contagion of scandal. The social fallout would be immense. She would be immediately shunned. Invitations to courtly events would cease. Other noble women would avoid her, lest their own reputations be tarnished by association. The whispers would be deafening. She is defiled. Her honor is gone. What a disgrace to her family. She would be branded as unfit, unchaste, or even a harlot. In the cruel language of the time, her marriage prospects would be completely ruined. The arranged marriage, if any, would be immediately called off, usually with significant financial penalties for her family, as the betrothed party would be justified in breaking the contract due to her moral failings. She would be considered unmarriageable, forced into a life of seclusion, perhaps sent to a convent to hide her shame, or condemned to spinsterhood, living a life of quiet desperation under the shadow of her family's scorn. If she became pregnant, the child would be considered illegitimate, unable to inherit, and her shame would be permanently visible. For a man, while his premarital sexual activities might be tolerated to a degree, open promiscuity was still damaging. If he was known to keep multiple mistresses, or to frequent brothels openly, or to seduce noble women indiscriminately, it would signal a lack of self-control, a propensity for excess, and a potential threat to the honor of his future wife and her family. Prospective father-in-law would fear that he would bring scandal and ruin upon his daughter, or that he would not be a loyal or faithful husband. His reputation would suffer, and he might find himself with fewer desirable marriage options, only being considered by families who were desperate for an alliance or less concerned with such matters. Furthermore, any open defiance of moral or religious laws, such as blatant blasphemy or participation in forbidden rituals, would also fall under immorality. Such acts could draw the wrath of the church, leading to excommunication or worse. And no family wanted a spouse who might be branded a heretic. In a society where lineage, honor, and legitimate heirs were everything, open immorality or promiscuity was the ultimate social suicide. It was a direct assault on the values of the age, leaving no room for redemption or rehabilitation in the eyes of medieval high society. Your date would not just be ruined, your entire life would be.